The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Poe, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Most Americans may not be aware of what is taking place by our government. Our government is spying on Americans, and I think it's in violation of the U.S. Constitution. And all the talk that we've been having the last few weeks, we're missing one of the most basic issues that we hold dear, the right of privacy. Let me explain how it's taking place. Go back to Snowden. We didn't know about all of the spying going on Americans until Snowden revealed that. I'm no fan of his. I think he ought to be prosecuted, but we know information about our government spying on Americans. Let me go and talk about specifically the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. What is that? FISA allows our government to spy on foreign agents, which include terrorists, primarily overseas. And so what happens is government goes to a FISA court. What is that? It is a secret court that operates in secret, that issues secret warrants. I personally have an issue with that because it reminds me too much of the Star Chamber in England, where they operated in secret and tried people in secret. And as a former judge, I'm very concerned about the loss of our Fourth Amendment right of privacy in the United States based on this law. Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, courts operating secret issue warrants to go after bad guys overseas. So they seize that information and they put it in a database. Here's what happens. While seizing that information of communication, maybe an Al-Qaeda guy talking to another Al-Qaeda guy, they put that information in a database, but also that information is seized on Americans. Incidental is what they call that. That may be a communication with an American, has nothing to do with terrorism. It could be something else. So that information is seized on Americans based on this warrant by a FISA judge on foreigners. Information is put in a database. Here's what happens. Occasionally, government decides to go into that database that was seized without a Fourth Amendment warrant and see how many times a name comes up. They call it a query. That is another fancy name for a search. So they search that database to see how many times Bobby Oglethorpe's name pops up. Then they go to their administrative folks and get a piece of paper that allows them then a second search. They search that database to see if Bobby Oglethorpe is committing crimes in the U.S., such as nothing to do with terrorism. Maybe it's bank robbery. Maybe it's IRS fraud. Maybe it violates other laws in the United States. So then they seize that information, and we don't know how many times they do that. The Judiciary Committee has asked the Justice Department, how many times have you done that? They refuse to tell us. Suspicion, isn't it? Well, I'll tell you how many times it is. According to the Washington Post, 90% of the account holders whose communications were collected were not the targets, the bad guys overseas. 90% of them. Many of them were Americans. Nearly half of the surveillance files contain names, email addresses, and other details that the NSA marked as belonging to U.S. citizens or residents. So what information are they getting? Emails, communications, text messages. They seize that, then they go through that database to see if Bobby Oglethorpe is a bank robber or whatever. And all of that is done in secret. Remember, secret courts issuing secret warrants, and they don't tell anybody about that. That's a violation of the Fourth Amendment on Americans. Let me read the Fourth Amendment. The right of people to be secure in their persons, places, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated. No warrant shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by an oath, affirmation, describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. So in this situation, government seizes the information without a probable cause warrant. Then they search the information to see how many times Bobby Oglethorpe maybe has violated other laws, and they do it without a probable cause warrant. That is allowed under 702 of the FISA legislation. We are getting ready to reauthorize FISA. This 702 provision should require a warrant to search that information, a warrant to take that content of that information and make it public or file on Bobby Oglethorpe. The Fourth Amendment is sacred to this country, and I ask unanimous consent to introduce the Fourth Amendment into the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Congress must set the standard for privacy, not the courts, and we are called upon to fix this spying on Americans and not allow it. And that's just the way it is. I'll yield back.
The gentleman yields.